Good afternoon, everyone. I offer my gratitude to the organizers of this Peace Forum. And as I have been hearing and feeling, it is, of course, very well timed for us to be able to gather today, to galvanize our energy, to search our hearts, to think about what is the right way ahead for us. And so I want to share a few thoughts with you this afternoon about compassion as the key to our peace building. And I think that this topic may be also of use to us in this time of stress. A student wrote to me and asked, how do we live in this world and not become disheartened? How do we not lose heart? How do we work for peace and not become overwhelmed by all of the pain in the world, by the immensity of the need, and by the insanity of world leaders? How can we be compassionate and not lose heart and not lose hope? So, losing heart is when we stop believing that we can succeed. We lose heart when we stop believing that we can succeed. We lose heart when we look at the situations either in our own communities or the global situation, the inequality and violence in our society, and that our nation perpetrates in the world. When we look at that and we see only that, we lose heart. We lose heart when we measure the immensity of the need and decide that our own ability to make a difference is insignificant in light of that need. We lose heart. Yet the human heart, the human spirit, is profoundly resilient. I would venture to guess that you have seen that in your own life, and you have seen it in the life of our world, time and time again, this resilience of the human heart. So this student wrote to me and said she understood in her question about how do we live in this world and not lose heart. She said, I understand. She understood my explanation about that I had given to the class about why it was important that we not lose heart, that we not become too discouraged or allow ourselves to get pulled down by our emotions in the face of the suffering in our world. She said that she understood my explanation that if we allow ourselves to become overwhelmed by suffering, we lose our strength. We lose our strength and our ability to actually respond to that suffering. We lose our ability to actually do something about it. So, in short, we lose our ability to be compassionate and to contribute to peace in the world. So pity can take us into the depths of feeling for another, but compassion demands that we do something about it. So in order for us to be able to be compassionate day after day, to have that resilience, we have to find a way to not become overwhelmed by the need that is before us, to not lose heart. But the question that she kept pressing me for was, how? How? How do we do this? How is it possible to keep our hearts open day after day in the face of what is in front of us? And I think it couldn't be a more appropriate question for us today. I know that I am speaking to a group of peacemakers today. I see many friends and colleagues out there, and many of you I know as distinguished individuals who have been working for peace for decades. been working for peace and been working to bring justice to our world. So I know that you know that peace is not an event, and that it's not an attainment either. It's not something that we win or something that we accomplish or something that we get, but it is a way of life that has to be practiced and lived day after day. And I believe that compassion and our ability to cultivate compassion is the key for that. That the way to be able to live in peace every day and do what we need to do as peacemakers is tied to compassion. And the way to keep our hearts open and to not lose heart in the face of what is going on in the world, day after day, discouragement after discouragement. You know, how many of you, like me, said, not again, when this news broke? Not again, not again. So how do we keep our hearts open in the face of that? So I want to offer that besides being a virtue, compassion is an art and a skill. It means we can learn it, we can practice it. And today, we know that as human beings, we're actually wired for it. This is really wonderful news, that we're naturally inclined towards it, and that even though we might lose touch with compassion, that is already innate to us, we can cultivate it. So for a long time, I prayed about this issue. You know, this new neuroscientists are measuring our brains and letting us know that, you know, we are wired for compassion. And this is really good news. But I was wondering how do we become more compassionate? How do we cultivate the kind of feeling and response that has us move into action as a people, you know, as individuals, but also as communities and nations? You know, how does that happen? So about the time that this question rose to a crescendo in my mind, you know, how do we get more compassion in our lives and in our world? I was given an incredible opportunity. I was given an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with the opportunity to ask whatever question I wanted to ask. So I asked this one that was on my mind. I mean, imagine if you have this question, and then you're given that opportunity to ask him, of all people, how can we cultivate compassion? How can we have more of it in our world? Well, I want to say I think he liked the question. He was ready for it. And he spoke for some time in response, and he gave 3 important keys. So 3 things I want to share with you today that he said we must do if we want more compassion in our world. First, he said, you must have unity. Unity with yourself and unity with one another. Now, I was with a group of religious and spiritual leaders, and so he first was underscoring the importance of the religious traditions to be able to work together. How important that is, that we have to have unity among diverse faiths. When I was driving here today, I asked them, others in the car, if they had heard, I saw an email go by that the Pope had called for a day of fasting and prayer on Saturday. Did you hear that? Some of you, how many of you heard that? So maybe about a third. A day of fasting and prayer around this issue. And it made me think, well, what if all of our religious and spiritual leaders said, let's have a day of fasting and prayer? I mean, wouldn't it be more creative than anything we have ever done when we're facing a decision like this? That all the people around the world and all the diverse religions and faiths said, let's have a day of fasting and prayer. So His Holiness said you must have unity. unity amongst yourselves. And he also indicated unity within yourself, meaning that our soul, our essence, our hearts, our minds, our speech, our actions need to be in integrity. We need to be in harmony with ourselves. So he said, you have to have unity. And then he said, you must take your religion or your spiritual tradition more seriously. Now, this was really something, considering he was talking to a group of religious and spiritual leaders, and he said, you've got to take this thing more seriously. And that was an interesting challenge. And so I asked myself, and I have been passing on this to those that I have spoken with since, what would it be like for us? You know, whether you're a humanist and you don't follow a particular religious path, or whatever your religion is, or your spiritual tradition, what would it be like for us to take that more seriously? What would it have us do? What is the response that our religious or spiritual traditions offer us in the face of what is going on in our world? And I asked myself, if I took my faith and my spiritual tradition more seriously, would it impact my ability to be compassionate? Would it answer the question for me? Every faith calls for compassion. We have some version of the golden rule that we share, this ethic of reciprocity. We have that in common. Let us do unto others as we would have them do unto us. So His Holiness said, if you want more compassion, if you want peace, take that seriously. And the third thing he said was, you must educate for compassion. You must educate for compassion. In just listening to the panelists earlier on, just teaching our children how to resolve conflict. That's what we should be teaching in schools. And that's some of the work that we're up to with Carry the Vision, is teaching how to resolve conflict. So a few days ago, I watched the film 42, the story of Jackie Robinson, the first African American to play in Major League Baseball and to break through the color line, being the first to integrate what we often think of as our all-American sport. I found it to be a painful and poignant film. And there was much in it that moved me, but one scene in particular just grabbed me. And it was a close-up of a white father and his little son attending the game together. How many of you saw that movie? So, and in that part of the film, the camera zooms in on this father and son, and you see the little boy's absolute delight at being at the ball game. This, I love baseball, and what a joy, what fun. And there's that, and then when Robinson comes out on the field, the father and the white people around him start shouting racial epithets at him, full of vitriol and hatred. And you see the little boy first feeling the pain of that, and then confusion, and then in the next moment joining in so that he can fit in. Racism is learned. Hatred is learned. Violence is learned. But peace is also learned, and compassion is learned. So we can and we must, as His Holiness said, educate for compassion, teach ourselves, teach our children its basis, where it comes from, why it's essential, and how to call it forth. So without compassion, how can we ever have peace? And without peace, how will we ever have happiness? I'm going to conclude with a quote from His Holiness, which he says is the challenge that is placed before every thoughtful person today. Today, the human soul asks the question, what can I do to preserve the beauty and the wonder of our world and to eliminate anger and hatred and the disparity that inevitably causes it in the part of the world which I touch? What can I do in the part of the world which I touch? Let us cultivate compassion and together find our way to peace. Thank you all.